Hello and welcome. My name is Sherida Phibbs, and I am thrilled to have you join us today for the first session of our four-part sourdough adventure. Making sourdough bread is knowing the science behind it and a combination of the skill and art. And like any craft, you never truly master it. You just get better with practice. I am not a beginner, nor am I a master. I'm somewhere in the middle of my sourdough journey. And each time I bake, I learn something new. And throughout my journey, I've immersed myself in various books, social media groups, and the wisdom of fellow sourdough bakers. I've discovered that there are countless techniques and recipes out there, and everyone finds what works best for them and their lifestyles. You know, my sourdough journey has had its share of challenges and successes. And one significant challenge is navigating the vast amount of information in various publications and on social media. Now, while many members of these communities, they mean well, the advice can be a mix of good and bad. And for beginners, it's especially tough to discern which information to follow. And that brings me to the purpose of this four-part presentation. I will be sharing what I've learned and what works for me, hoping to help you find success and joy in your own sourdough journey. Now, a little bit about us and what we do. We are the University of California Cooperative Extension Master Food Preservers. I am with the San Joaquin County program. We are a dedicated team of volunteers who are passionate about food preservation and food safety. Our mission is to educate our community on safe, effective food preservation methods, which includes home canning, cold storage, dehydration, and fermentation. We provide science-based, research-backed information on food safety. Now, we offer it through workshops, demonstrations, and educational resources on various food preservation techniques. We teach best practices for ensuring the safety and the quality of preserved foods. We do not endorse, nor do we recommend any specific brand or manufacturers of the products that we demonstrate or mention in our presentations. Our focus is purely on sharing unbiased, accurate information to help you preserve food safely and successfully. Now, there are several steps in making sourdough bread. And instead of making one long presentation and overwhelming you with a lot of information, I purposely decided to break it into 4 sessions. Session 1, which is today, we'll be diving into the fascinating science of the fermentation process. You'll learn about the natural processes that make sourdough unique. We'll also cover the essential equipment, ingredients, and supplies that is going to be needed to make your sourdough culture. Now, in session 2, we will be crafting our own sourdough starters from scratch. I'll show you how to work with dehydrated starters as well, and give you tips on maintaining your starter to keep it healthy and active. Now, in our 3rd session, we will focus on crafting breads, muffins, and more using your sourdough culture. We'll explore creative discard ideas to ensure that nothing goes to waste. And in our final session, number 4, we will celebrate our baking triumphs by sharing your successes. We'll also tackle any challenges you've encountered with a troubleshooting segment to help you perfect your sourdough baking skills. Again, Thank you for being here, and let's get started on this adventure. Now, today's agenda, we'll go through the history of sourdough bread making. We'll look at if there's any health benefits. We'll look at the science of fermentation of sourdough. What is a starter? The helpful tools that are needed, and the flour types and the basic ingredients, and how to store our flour for freshness and to keep it safe. Now, while making sourdough bread, it is a delightful and captivating process that it has captured the hearts of many home bakers. And here is why it is so fun, exciting, and it can become addictive. I have found very fond memories as a child coming home from school and walking into the house with that smell of freshly baked bread. My mother's bread was just wonderful, and it just smelt so great. And, baking sourdough is like creating edible art. You get to mix it, you stretch it, and you fold it, you shape it, and you bake it, and it results in a unique loaf every single time. The possibilities are endless. You can add various inclusions, such as herbs, seeds, berries, cheeses, or even chocolate to customize your bread. Now, the process, it begins with nurturing a sourdough starter, which is like having a living pet in your kitchen. You feed it and you watch it grow. And, some people, they even name their starter. It becomes part of your baking family. And it requires patience. You let the dough ferment. It rises. It develops flavor over several hours or even days. And the slow fermentation process, it is what creates the complex flavors and that chewy texture. And waiting for that perfect loaf, it becomes a rewarding anticipation. And making sourdough successfully, it involves understanding the science behind it. You learn about the hydration levels, gluten development, how time and temperature affects your fermentation. It's like conducting your own delicious science experiment. Sourdough bread is visually stunning. Its rustic crust, its airy crumb, and irregular shapes, it makes it a perfect subject for Instagram or Facebook-worthy photos. And sharing your creation with others just adds to the excitement of it all. And the sourdough community, well, it's vast and it's supportive, and people share their tips and they troubleshoot your issues, and we celebrate our successes. It's a way to connect with others who share your passion. Now, sourdough, it's been around for centuries, and baking it feels like tapping into an ancient tradition. The aroma of freshly baked bread, it fills your home. It provides comfort and nostalgia. And the flavor. The flavor of sourdough is unmatched. It's tangy, nutty, and it's deeply satisfying. And the crust crackles and the crumbs chewy, and it's moist. And every bite is a sensory delight. So again, well, let's get started. I have researched health benefits of sourdough, and this is what I found from WebMD and Eating Well. They suggest that sourdough bread offers several health benefits, and here are the reasons. The fermentation process used in making sourdough bread, it results in increased prebiotic and probiotic-like properties, which can help improve your gut health by supporting beneficial gut bacteria. And although sourdough bread is not gluten-free, studies suggest that it might help improve the digestion of gluten. And the fermentation process, it alters the enzymes in the wheat, and it potentially counteracts adverse reactions to gluten. Now, sourdough provides nutrients such as healthy carbs, proteins, fiber, iron, and vitamins like folic acid. And compared to white bread, sourdough consumption has been associated with a lower insulin response and better glucose control. Now, we need to remember that while sourdough has these benefits, moderation is key. We want to enjoy it as part of a balanced diet and consider opting for whole grain sourdough in addition to fiber for those additional fibers and nutrients. Some historical facts surrounding sourdough bread are, it has ancient roots. It dates back to around 3700 BC in Switzerland, and it was also consumed by the ancient Egyptians and the Greeks. And during the Alaskan Klondike gold rush, the miners heavily relied on sourdough bread for their nourishments. They carried that dehydrated sourdough starters in bottles hanging from their necks. And they also slept with it next to their body during the fermentation process to keep it warm. Now, the sourdough that they ate back then was quite primitive compared to the delicious sourdough that we enjoy today. So, sourdough, it has stood the test of time. It survived centuries and it's evolved across the cultures. So from ancient civilizations to modern bakers, its legacy continues to enrich our culinary experiences. And having an understanding of its origins, it gives us a deeper respect for this ancient art form. Now, despite its name, sourdough doesn't have to be tangy and sour. And the name actually refers to the method of leavening bread with a sourdough, which is the sourdough starter. And by manipulating time, temperature, and ratios, you can produce bread with a milder flavor. The more sourdough starter you use, the less time your dough needs to ferment, and it results in a milder taste. And the tangy taste of sourdough, it comes from lactobacillus, which lives in symbiosis with yeast. It feeds on the byproducts of yeast and fermentation, creating that distinctive flavor. So let's break down the science behind the sourdough bread in simple terms. When you mix flour and water, you create a paste. And the microbes, which are like your yeast and your bacteria, and they're from the environment and the flour, they start feeding on the sugars in that paste. And initially, any microbe can grow, including spoilage bacteria. Now, soon lactic acid bacteria, it takes over and it acidifies the mixture. Now, lactic bacteria produces lactic acid, and that's what's found in your yogurt and your cheeses. It gives the sourdough its mild tang. And the acidic acid, which is like found in your vinegars, is also produced, and it adds to the sour flavor. Now, the balance of these acids, that's what affects the taste and the texture of the bread. Sourdough's diverse microbial ecosystem, which is your yeast and your bacteria, they depend on factors like your flour choice, the culture temperature, and the feeding frequency. And the microbes, they work together to leaven the dough and create that flavor. And the result, well, it's a unique, tangy bread that reflects its time and place. So remember, sourdough is like a microbial serengeti. It's full of interacting yeast and bacteria, and each loaf tells a flavorful story. So what is a sourdough starter? Well, in simpler terms, a sourdough starter is like a lively neighborhood where the wild yeast and the bacteria coexist. And they work together to help that dough rise, and it creates a flavorful bread. And here is how it works. So I want you to imagine yeast and bacteria as friendly neighbors, and they rely on each other for their survival. And their favorite food is flour. It is their daily meal. Now, the yeast, it turns the flour into carbon dioxide gas bubbles, and that's what makes the dough rise, and it produces more yeast. And the bacteria turns the flour into sugar for the yeast. And they also create tangy acids, and it contributes to the bread's unique taste. And together, they add a variety of flavor compounds to the bread. And in sourdough starter, you'll find many different species of bacteria and yeast all working together. So, how does a starter turn the flour and water into a risen dough? In simpler terms, a sourdough starter is like a magical mix of flour and water that comes alive. This is what I've been mentioning in the slides before, but I'm going to break it down just a little bit different for you. Now, you start by mixing that active sourdough starter with flour, water, and salt. And then the fermentation happens, and that's when the yeast and the bacteria, they start to feast on the sugars in the flour, and they munch away, and they produce three things: carbon dioxide, and this is the gas that gets trapped in the dough, and it makes it rise like a fluffy balloon. Ethanol, yep, that's like a tiny brewery, but I don't want you to worry because it evaporates during the baking. And then the acids, and these are the acids that give the sourdough its unique tangy flavor. And the bacteria also releases enzymes that pre-digest that flour, and it makes the sourdough easier to digest, and it gives it its health benefits. And gluten. It must develop to make a strong dough that can hold the bubbles throughout the baking. And then the baking magic happens, and voila, you've got risen, flavorful sourdough bread. Now, as we continue on this sourdough journey, I will not only be guiding you through each step, but I also will be explaining the reasons behind them. Understanding the why behind each step, it enhances our knowledge and it helps us become better bakers. And the more we comprehend the process, the more skilled we become. So the equipment that we need to make our sourdough culture is 2 clear starter jars with a lid. And you can use a 1-quart mason jar, or if you have a cute little clear canister. But I suggest that it always be glass. And your rigid spatula is to stir and scrape the sides of the jar. And a scale with metric units, which measures grams, and a tare function. And I'll speak more on that on the next slide. An instant read digital thermometer, and I'll share more information on that as well. And an elastic band or some way to gauge the rise of your starter when you feed it. Now, when baking sourdough bread, using a baking scale that measures in grams is highly recommended for several reasons. Your weight measurements are more accurate and consistent than the volume measurements. That would be like your cups or your scoops. You know, flour can be scooped and compacted differently when using measuring cups, leading to inaccuracies. And these inaccuracies can significantly affect the hydration of your dough. And the amount of water that is needed to hydrate your dough, it depends on the precise weight of your flour. And using a scale ensures that you consistently achieve the desired dough consistency and hydration level. And then, you know, a scale, it allows you to dump all of your ingredients into one bowl without needing multiple cups and spoons. And it simplifies the baking process and it reduces your cleanup. And you get consistent results every single time. There's no guessing and there's no inconsistencies. You know, measuring by volume is tricky. You can spoon sifted flour into a 1-cup measurement and scrape it off, and you're going to get different weights every single time. I just did this yesterday, and scooping and into a 1 cup, I did 3 different weight measurements. Each time I did it, it was a different weight. I went from, a 130 measurement, a 120 measurement, and like a 124 measurement in grams. And so you can see it is very inconsistent when you are using a measuring cup. And dough with a little extra or a little less, it's remarkably different to handle and to make a good, consistent loaf. A recipe with 4 cups of flour could wind up with as much as even 700 grams of extra flour. Now, just to summarize again, a food scale, it measures the actual weight of ingredients and it provides a level of accuracy that measuring cups cannot match. And using an instant read digital thermometer is crucial for these reasons. You have the yeast, and it's the driving force behind the fermentation. It is sensitive to temperature, and you can kill your starter if it gets above 100 degrees. Now, achieving consistent results in sourdough baking can be challenging due to variables like your room temperatures and your humidity. And a digital thermometer helps you measure that exact temperature of your dough. It allows you to make the necessary adjustments to the water temperature or your proofing time to achieve a consistent texture and flavor. And the fermentation process is where the sourdough develops its characteristic tangy flavor and airy texture. And monitoring that dough's temperature with a thermometer, it ensures that it ferments at its optimal rate. And also, knowing the exact internal temperature of your bread, it can prevent under or over baking. Now, depending on your personal preferences and the type of bread that you're baking, bread is typically done when the internal temperature reaches around 200 to 210. And I personally bake mine to around 207 to 210. And that instant thermometer can always give you that precision that you need. So now let's dive into the essential topic of some of the typical flours used in sourdough baking and how to store your flour for freshness. Now this diagram, it shows the process of milled flour from the time it arrives at the mill until it's ready for the consumer. And I'm not going to go through each step, but as you can see in your commercial produced flour, it goes through a lot of different steps. Now, these are the various flours used in sourdough bread making. And for today, I'm only going to speak about the common wheat flours and the rye flour. And later in the series, I'll speak about the others. So the ones that are marked in yellow are the flours that are commonly used for making and maintaining your starter. So you have your bread flour. It has a high protein content. It's very strong and it has good elasticity for that good gluten development, and it's ideal for sourdough bread and due to its robust structure. And it's made from the hard white wheat, and it provides an excellent rise and structure in the oven. And then the all-purpose flour, and now I'm talking about the unbleached all-purpose. It's versatile flour. It's suitable for various baking, including sourdough. It has a moderate protein content. It works well for beginners, but it may not yield as much of a rise as your bread flour. And your whole wheat flours, well, they're higher in fiber and nutrient content than your white flours. They have more of a nutty flavor profile. They are made from the entire wheat kernel. It requires more hydration due to the bran and the germ, and it adds depth to sourdough flavor. And then we have our white whole wheat, which is milled from wheat, which has no red pigments in it, in the brand, and it's sweet and it's delicate flavor. and the bread is lighter in color than the other whole wheat. Now, your rye flour, it is a superstar when it comes to sourdough fermentation. It contains a high level of enzymes that attracts a variety of yeast, and it makes it particularly active in sourdough. And when you introduce rye to your starter, it ferments much faster. It gives you a more robust and stronger culture. Now, flour typically lasts from 8 to 12 months, and the key factors are proper storage and the type of flour that you're using. So your all-purpose and your bread flour, they have a shelf life of approximately 12 months, and your whole wheats, they are shorter and normally around 8 months, and that's because they retain more nutrients and they go rancid and spoil faster. So using unbleached flour for sourdough is your starter and bread. It is essential for several reasons. So the unbleached flour, it contains more natural enzymes and nutrients compared to the bleached flours. And these essential components, they play a crucial role in the fermentation process and contribute to the overall health of your sourdough starter. Now, your unbleached flour, it is less processed than the bleached and retaining more of its natural flavors and characteristics. When creating sourdough starters, the type of flour you use, it matters. And unbleached flour provides a better environment for growth for the wild yeast and the beneficial bacteria. And the bleaching process, it strips the natural coating of wild yeast on the grain. And since a sourdough starter thrives on friendly bacteria from the wild yeast, using unbleached flour, it ensures better starter activity over time. And using organic flour for sourdough starters and bread offers several advantages. You know, your organic flour tends to have a higher nutrient content compared to the conventionally grown wheat. It's nurtured through natural, nutrient-rich soils, resulting in flour that contains more essential vitamins and minerals. And when you choose organic flour, you avoid synthetic additives and chemicals found in conventionally produced flour. And organic farming practices, it prioritizes minimal intervention, and it leads to a cleaner, more distinctive flavor profile in your sourdough. And organic wheat is often of higher quality than conventionally grown wheat. And organic farmers, they cultivate varieties that are suited to their specific environment, and it results in a more robust and flavorful grain. And opting for organic flour, the benefits are not only for your sourdough, but also for the environment. Organic farming practices, they prioritize sustainability, healthy soil, water conservation, and pollution reduction. And baking sourdough is an art form, and the choice of flour, it matters. And using organic flour adds a personal touch to your sourdough. It reflects your commitment to quality and health and environment. So factors that can affect your flour freshness, well, the moisture is the first culprit, and flour is inherently dry, and it should remain that way. The excess moisture, it can lead to the development of mold or bacteria, and you always want to ensure that your flour is stored in a cool, dry place in an airtight container to maintain its freshness. And light, it can cause flour to lose its nutrients, color, and flavor. And heat is another factor that can adversely affect the quality of your flour. The exposure to high heat can cause your flour to go rancid, and this is especially true for those whole grain flours. So store your flour away from direct sunlight and heat sources like ovens and stovetops. And lastly, let's talk about odors. You know, flour has a tendency to absorb odors from its surroundings, and this can impact its flavor. So you want to avoid this issue. Ensure your flour is stored away from a strong smelling food, and don't use a container that has an odor. Now let's look at some container selections, and we'll start with the airtight containers, and such as your glass jars, your plastic containers, and your resealable bags. And these are the gem because they keep the moisture and the pest out, and they ensure your flour stays dry and uncontaminated. Now they come in various sizes, so you can choose one that suits your needs. And for those who are baking often, the large flour buckets are a lifesaver. They can hold a substantial amount of flour, making it accessible whenever you need it. You want to ensure that they have a tight seal to maintain the flour's freshness and quality. Now, remember, folks, proper storage is key to ensuring that every bake is as good as it can be. So you want to invest in food grade and quality containers. You will taste the difference in your baked goods. Now, knowing when your baked flour has gone bad is crucial for both the taste and the safety of your baked goods. And here are some telltale signs that your flour might need to be replaced. Fresh flour typically has a neutral or slightly nutty smell. And if your flour emits a rancid or musty odor, it's a clear indicator that it has gone bad. And look at the expiration date. Now, while expiration dates are estimates only, they are a good starting point. And if your flour is past that date, you want to check for other signs of spoilage before using it. Now, flour should maintain its original color. And if you notice any discoloration, such as yellowish or grayish tint, that also is a sign of oxidation, and the flour should not be used. And good flour should be soft and powdery. If it's clumping or hardening, this could be due to moisture and could indicate spoilage. Now, the presence of flour beetles or weevils is a definite sign that your flour has been compromised and should not be used. Now, though we do not recommend to taste raw flour due to safety concerns, a bitter taste of your baked item can indicate spoilage. An oily texture, if the flour feels oily, it may be due to the oils in the grains going rancid. So labeling and organizing. Well, why is it important? Well, it keeps you organized. It helps you identify the type of flour quickly. So on your label, you want to include the type of flour, and the expiration date, or, if you don't have the expiration date, the purchase date. You want to organize your flour storage area. It saves time during your baking. It prevents clutter and confusion. And some of the tips that I have for you is, to keep similar flours together. Place your frequently used flours within easy reach. And for like those seeds or the flours that you use very little of, you might be using them in resealable bags. So, you might want to store those in a bin or basket to group those related items together. Now let's dive into a smart strategy for preserving the quality of your flour over a longer time, and that would be freezing it. So why freeze flour? Well, freezing extends the shelf life of every flour type, and generally by an additional year. It prevents pests from infiltrating your flour. Your grain mites, your weevils, and other unwanted visitors, they will not survive the deep freeze. I personally will freeze all newly purchased flour for 48 hours, as it will kill any hitchhiking pests that came in the flour or packaging. Flour contains natural oils, especially those whole grain flours, and freezing It keeps these oils from going rancid due to oxidation. And your flour will retain its freshness and nutrients. And some practical tips I have for you is to remember to allow your frozen flour to come to room temperature before you use it. Give it a good stir to redistribute it. Now, raw flour. It should not be consumed due to several important reasons. We have a bacterial contamination. Although it appears powdery and it's similar to cooked ingredient, it is raw. And flour is made from grains grown in fields where they may be exposed to bacteria like Salmonella and E. coli. And processing it at the mill, it does not kill the bacteria. The flour cannot be washed to remove contaminants. Now, there have been E. coli and Salmonella outbreaks linked to raw flour consumption. So the Centers for Disease Control Prevention, which is CDC, it lists raw flour as a food that can cause food poisoning. And then we have concerns for safe handling and cross-contamination. If you spill flour on the counter and don't clean it up properly, or if it comes in contact with other food, the bacteria on the flour can transfer to other surfaces. So keep an eye out for that raw flour hiding in other places. Cookie dough is probably the most common example. But also be cautious of crafts that involve raw flour, like dough to play with or homemade ornaments. Also, if you spread flour over your countertop for kneading, you want a thorough cleanup afterwards. And if you transfer flour to a separate container than it came in, you want to make sure that you regularly clean out that container between the batches. If you had stored contaminated flour in that container and poured a fresh bag on top without emptying your container and washing it, your brand new bag of flour will become contaminated as well. So that brings us to the end of our session 1. Next month, or session 2, we will be covering the sourdough culture. I'll take you through how to make your own. And we'll talk about purchased or gifted starters. They can come your way either hydrated or dehydrated. We'll talk about feeding that starter, keeping it healthy, and troubleshooting. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to you joining us for our second session.